Good morning, it's Jenny Fletcher from Hub Cymru Africa, and we're going to begin the webinar now. I'm hoping you can hear me clearly enough, but do let us know if the voice is faint and you can't hear us clearly, and we'll make sure we get a bit closer to our microphone and help you out there, hopefully. So you should be able to hear me, as I say, but I can't hear you. We can't hear you at this stage. You have you all on mute. That will help prevent the background noise from all your locations from interfering with you all being able to hear this first presentation part. So that's our plan, is to make a presentation, to go through a presentation first, which you should be able to see on your screen. And again, please let us know if there's a problem with that through the chat box function on your toolbar, on the toolbox for the webinar. So we'll go through the presentation, and then at the end you'll be able to ask questions either through your chat and question box by typing them, and then we'll read them out loud and give you an answer, or by putting up your hand, and we'll explain how to do that later, and we can unmute you so that we can all hear you, and then you can ask your question. So, hoping that you can hear me. I don't think we've had any comments through yet. It's myself here, Jenny Fletcher, with Julian, Rossa, and we'll be taking it in turns to do a few sections each of the presentation. So, on screen, you should be able to see the presentation first slide talking about our grants round 2016. Bear with me a moment. Right, this year the areas of focus will remain the same as they were before. So it's still the sustainable livelihoods, climate change, health and lifelong learning, which should hopefully encompass most of what you want to do. In terms of the amount available, we have the same amount as for the previous year, although some of it is already committed from multiple year projects from last year, so it is a bit less. But also we've got the £50,000 as last year is ring-fenced for health activities. There's the 3 grant categories, same again as last year, which is the 0 to 1,000, 1 to 5, or 5 to 15. So you apply for one of those categories. Right, in terms of our overall criteria, the lead applicants must be based in Wales, which means that you need to have some sort of base in Wales and a benefit to Wales. We'll come on to that. If you're not sure, or if you're part of an organisation that has a UK base, or base in England or somewhere else in the UK, but that also has a branch in Wales, then let us know, and we can talk about whether that creates an issue or not. There are different arrangements, different setups of different organisations which we've been discussing with people. But yeah, basically we're looking for a lead person on a lead organisation to be based in Wales. Your overseas activities must take place in Africa. Obviously we are an Africa related thing, so Sub-Saharan Africa is our main area of focus, and you must demonstrate this benefit to Wales. This is a requirement of the Welsh Government, because the Welsh Government's powers mean that you have to be able to demonstrate that at the same time as benefiting perhaps a project in Africa, you also need to be able to demonstrate a benefit to Wales. If you're not familiar with this type of thing, there is information in our FAQ document, our frequently asked questions document, on the website. So there's some examples there and some illustrations of what we mean, but we'll come back to it a little bit as well. We'd like you to demonstrate value for money. We're a fairly small grant pot in the grand scheme of things overall, and we want to spread it to as many of good projects and as many of you as possible. So we are looking for projects that also do as much as they can to help meet the costs, and we'll talk a bit about what that means. But we're looking for cost effective and not very expensive interventions, or if they are very expensive, that you're finding a way to contribute yourselves. So we therefore encourage match funding, which means any level of cash contributions towards your project. And we also want to know if you've previously received a grant from one of the previous Wales Africa community or links projects. So if you have received money before, particularly if you haven't reported on it, we want to know. We ask you to declare that on the form. And we also want you to comment on how what impact you've had from that and what progression you've had from that grant. Right, this year you as an organisation can submit a multiple bids, and those organisations who are currently in receipt of a grant, perhaps a 2 or 3 year grant, can also submit further bids. However, we would say that it's only going to be in exceptional circumstances that we fund more than one organisation simultaneously. However, we are willing to look at all bids submitted to us. If you're an individual or an unconstituted group, and we'll come into the definition of constituted and unconstituted in a moment, you can only apply for a maximum of £1,000. So if you can only ask for more than £1,000 if you are a constituted group or a registered organisation of some type. We're happy to have joint applications from consortia of Welsh organisations. That's great. If that means that you're part of more than one bid to us, that's fine. You can be a lead or a partner in several bids. Again, we're leaving the door open. We'll consider that on case, as the applications come in. Right, you should demonstrate that if you're making any purchasing decisions, we'd like you to know that you're making those purchasing decisions with using ethical and fair trade criteria wherever possible. And if you're travelling, international travel, we'd like you to tell us that you can use Cardiff Airport wherever possible as well. Right, some quick things we won't fund, and again, these are very similar. These are the same as they were last year. I won't read all those through, but just to leave them flagged up. One perhaps point to highlight that we've had some queries on already. Whilst the point there about religious sort of activity, evangelical or proselytising activities, that's worded quite carefully. It doesn't mean that if you are a religious organisation that you can't apply, or if your partner has a religious is a religious organisation or has a religious ethos. Faith-based, activities and organisations are very common, and it's no problem to apply. What we want to be assured of is that there is discrimination is not being practiced in the activities, so that people are not being excluded on the grounds of religion from the actual implementation of the activities, and that during the activities, evangelising is not part of the activities that we fund you for. So that's the bit that we don't want to fund. So hopefully the rest are clear, but you can ask some questions about that later if you want to. Right, a couple of additional things to note. In health projects, we're going to be giving priority to any projects that involve participants who work in the Welsh NHS or in other parts of public health organisations in Wales. You can spread your funding over 1 financial year or 2 financial years. I'm afraid no longer can you ask for 3 financial years because our funding is not guaranteed past 2 years now. So we've got a 3-year funding pot. So some people had 3-year projects last year, but now it can only be 2-year up to 2-year projects. Right, something to note about financial year. So we work on a financial year basis, which is the 1st of April till the end of March each year. So when we say what do you want in your first year, or what activities can you do in 1 year project, what we mean is between up to end of March 2017 for this grants round. But please note there that we do have an issue this year. It's due to elections. But it means we can't hand out monies until after that period. So we can't actually give you funding until June onwards rather than April. I'm afraid that means that we can't fund any activity that takes place between April and June this year. So we can, this year, when we talk about a one-year project, we mean between the 1st of June to the 31st of March 2017. The 1st of June this year. Right, we can support and we're willing to look at bids for capital and operational expenditure, and that kind of thing is equipment or infrastructure, flights, transport. These things were limited last year by a 25% rule on operational expenditure, but we've removed that for this year. So we're willing to consider the way that we appreciate that organisations and projects operate on various different bases, and sometimes you're fundraising for one type of thing or another. So we're willing to sort of have you argue your case, but we do need good justification if you're asking for a high amount to be spent on capital or operational expenditure. We'd like to know why that, you know, do justify that in your application and explain how you're funding other parts of your application. For organisations over £1,000, and this goes back to this issue about constituted and unconstituted, if you want more than £1,000, you must be a constituted group and have a bank account for your group with 2 unrelated signatories, and that's our definition of a constituted group. Again, there's some guidance on this in the frequently asked questions document on our website. We'd also like you to make a reference in your application to how you contribute to the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Hopefully you know a little bit about one of those by now, and we're trying to promote some awareness, but don't worry if not. They're both fairly new still, and we have summarised them. We've summarised the provisions of the Wales Act and the headline SDGs, the new UN SDGs, in the frequently asked questions document on our website. So we'd like just a reference to those, or just an acknowledgement within your application, either perhaps in the needs section or the summary section, about what it is, how it relates to those things. This is our main grants round this year. We will be doing a small autumn grants round, most likely, where a few small grants will be awarded, but we are talking a very small amount of money, and it's particularly aimed, or it's particularly designed for fair trade groups who may be planning activities for Fair Trade Fortnight in February, who are not yet ready to put in an application just now, because we're actually in the middle of Fair Trade Fortnight now. So bear that in mind, and please, if you do want money, and you do want money in this financial year, it would be much better if you apply now in this round. Right, I'm going to hand over to Julian.
Thank you, Jenny. Good morning. So my name is Julian Ross. I'm the Grants and Policy Manager at Hub Cymru Africa, and we'll talk you through some further bits of this scheme. So we're looking at some of the different types of grant that we'll award. So the smallest grant is anywhere between £1 and £1,000. These grants can be applied for by individuals or groups, so you don't have to have a constituted group, you don't have to have a charity in order to apply for one of these grants, and they can cover small activities including campaigns or events, but it could also be as part funding to a larger project, which could indeed involve activities in Africa, but you're quite fine to just run some activities in Wales for one of these grants. Some of the larger grants, we do require a bit more evidence. We want to see more clarity from you on what the project is all about. And for that, you have to demonstrate a project need based on some sort of needs assessment. Again, this doesn't have to be in Africa. It could be a needs assessment of why it is that people in Rhondda and Taff need more encouragement to buy fair trade products, for example. But we do need to see some sort of assessment of why it is you think this project is necessary. As well as having that, we'd like to see you come up with some strategic objectives to show how your project will deliver some impact. And you must be clear on how the skills of the people who are involved in running this project and in doing this work are actually sufficient to deliver what you say you want to do. For a grant of up to £5,000, you can be delivering work in Africa, but it's also possible to be just delivering work in Wales. But if you are working in Africa, we want to see that you're working to build the capacity or the skills of your African partner organisation, and we'd like you to make sure that you're linking to some organisation and something on the ground in Africa. That could be local government, it could be voluntary organisations, it could be a community council, it could be anything, but we'd like to see that you're working with people who are already on the ground in Africa. So for a larger grant between £5,000 and £15,000, you must be able to demonstrate some clear impact in Africa. Again, that should be as a result of a needs assessment, and you should be able to show how it is that you're able to deliver the things that you say you will. We need similar criteria to the smaller grants, in that you must deliver against strategic objectives and you must link the skills of the people involved to what you're doing in the project. But we'd also like you to show how this project demonstrates sustainability, how it's not one short intervention, but actually is something which can have an ongoing impact when you've left and when the project is finished. And similarly, we want to show that you can build the skills and the capacity of your African partner and that you're developing African leadership of the project. So, as well as filling in the application form and showing all of these things, and we will go through some of the features on the form quite soon, you'll also be needing to submit an equal opportunities monitoring form if you're an individual making an application. That doesn't apply to organisations making an application. And you'll need to supply a declaration of conflict of interest form for all applications. If you're applying for more than £1,000, then we'd like to see letters of support from all of the partner organisations who are involved in delivering the project. And if applicable, if there is a partnership which will be doing this work, then we need to see a partnership agreement. We'd also like to see the constitutional documents for the lead organisation which is applying for the funds. So that would be the constitution of your group, your organisation, your company, or whatever that is. So a few words about the process that we go through once we've received the applications. Staff here in the Hub Cymru Africa team will assess the applications to make sure that they're eligible. The team then will go through the applications and rank them and rate them and see how good we think they are. For small grants of up to £1,000, then those can be approved by the team here at a team meeting. But for larger applications, so anything over £1,000, we will convene an independent panel of representatives who've been nominated by the boards of the organisations who make up the Hub Cymru Africa partnership. So there'll be an independent panel which will meet then in late April. Some point after May the 7th, we will communicate the outcome of the applications to the applicant, and that could be either that we will agree the application in full, that we will offer partial funding, that we maybe will set conditions on providing the grant, or we will let you know if we've just rejected your application. Then the successful applicants will be sent a grant offer letter with full terms and conditions, including their reporting requirements, and that has to be signed and returned, and we have to make sure that all the documentation is in place before we will release the funds. And those funds then will be released in late May or early June, depending on the timing of your project. But as Jenny's mentioned, we can't fund any activities that take place before June this year. Right, so we're just going to go through some of the sections of the application forms. There are 3 application forms. There's a different form for the £1,000 up to £1,000 grants, for the up to £5,000 and up to £15,000 grants applications. The smaller grant form is reasonably simple. In fact, all of the forms are reasonably simple, but the application form for up to £1,000 is, I would say, very simple. But there are a number of the bits on the form which are the same across the different forms that you might want to fill in. So one of these, section 4, is about partnership or about the organisation that you are. We need to know about the aim or the purpose of your organisation. We'd like to know about your experience of delivering the sorts of activities that you're applying for money to fund. And if you're working with a partner organisation, we'd like to know about the experience that you have of working together and what sort of experiences that they have of delivering this sort of project. We also want to make sure that the people who are delivering this work have the skills and experience to make it a success. We don't want to be giving money to people who've got absolutely no qualifications in doing the sorts of things that they say they will. That doesn't mean that everybody involved in your group has to have a degree in mechanical engineering or anything. What it means is that you have thought about the skills and experience that are required, and if you don't have them within your partnership, that you can work out a way of getting the people there who've got the skills, who've got the experience, and can make your project a success. So section 5 on all of the application forms is about a justification or a needs assessment. And for all applications, you have to describe the need that you've identified. Why is it that you want to run this project? What is happening in this community or this area that means that this intervention is going to be helpful? For small applications, we ask quite simply for you to just tell us the need that you've identified. For larger amounts of money, over £1,000, we also ask you to describe the process that you went through in order to arrive at those conclusions. How did you assess that problem? What sort of steps did you take? Have you conducted workshops or discussions within the community that you're working in? Have you done some further reading and research with government reports? And if you have spoken to people in the community, then we'd like to know how you did that and what sort of methods that you used. So section 6 of the form is the project description. We've got a little space there for you to give us a project summary, to give an overview of what the goal of the project is, what the key activities are. This has got to be a very simple thing. Really, this is your opportunity to sell your project to the people who will be reading this form, who will be deciding on whether to fund your application. So make it snappy, make it interesting, and make it very clear what it is that you're going to achieve, what it is that you're going to do, and who is going to do it. That's very important. For grants of over £1,000, we want to see what sort of lessons you've learned from doing this sort of activity or anything else in the past. It may be that this project is completely novel to you, or it may well be that you've been delivering this sort of work for quite a long time, that your partner has been delivering this sort of work, and that you've got some lessons from having done that. So we'd like to know really about what you've done before and how that has influenced the decisions that you've made in designing this project that you're applying for money for. So that's a very important point. We really do want to see that the funding that we're giving is helping people to learn, to develop, and to change the way that they're doing things. We're asking then for you to fill in a reasonably simple measuring success table or a project plan. These are slightly different on the smaller grant forms or the larger grant forms. On the smaller grant forms, they're very, very simple. But what we do want to see is what your main activities are, what are the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, what sort of targets you're going to set, and we do ask that these targets be as measurable as they possibly can. We'd like to know how you're going to measure things and what sort of evidence you're going to collect to demonstrate that your project was a success, or indeed to find out that your project failed. We'd also like to know what your timescales are, and all of those boxes should be completed, but it doesn't need to be too elaborate. Keep it quite simple so that it's easily understood by the panel. We need to communicate about these projects because we want to promote active global citizenship in Wales. We want to be able to demonstrate to the Welsh Government, to funders and to Welsh taxpayers that the work that we're doing is being a success and is having some sort of impact. So please tell us about how you're going to communicate about your work as widely as possible in Wales and, if relevant, in Africa as well. We ask about beneficiaries, and beneficiaries are a very important part of all of this. We need to show benefits to Wales, and if your project is working in Africa, then we also need to show an impact in Africa. We ask about the difference between direct and indirect beneficiaries. This is a reasonably simple concept. If your project, for example, is delivering training to artisans in Tanzania to improve the quality of their products, then we would say that any artisan that attended that training and passed the course is a direct beneficiary. We could then argue that anybody who relies on that artisan is an indirect beneficiary. So if your artisan has a husband, an elderly father, and several children that she's supporting, then they would all be indirect beneficiaries of your project. If you're training up a nurse, then you could argue that anybody that this nurse treats over the course of the next few years is an indirect beneficiary. So it's very easy to assess your direct beneficiaries. We understand it can be a bit more difficult to estimate how many indirect beneficiaries that your project will have, but we just ask you to do your best, please. It's important that we know the sex and age of the beneficiaries because we want to monitor the overall success of the project. We want to see who is being helped by the project overall. And as I mentioned, then always need to be Welsh beneficiaries because this is Welsh Government money. We ask that you talk about how you'll be acting inclusively. Now, acting inclusively is not just an equal opportunity statement for your organisation, but it is to make sure that if you're running a project, that you're not either deliberately or accidentally excluding portions of the community from accessing the things that you're doing. And we know that all over the world, it can be very easy to run things which inadvertently exclude people with disabilities, exclude people on the basis of gender, exclude people on the basis of sexual orientation or religion. And we'd like you to demonstrate how you're going to make sure that your project is as inclusive as possible in Wales and in Africa. There's a section on risk assessment. We think it's very important that people do think very clearly about the risks that their project entails. We've had quite a number of applications where people believe that their project has no risks. We don't think that demonstrates a very robust way of assessing the likelihood of anything going wrong. Risks don't have to be severe. It could be quite easy that somebody who's crucial to delivering the project falls ill on the day before it's about to launch. We just need you to consider what the risks are and what you're going to do to mitigate those risks. So some of them might be general project risks. For example, you're planning to run an activity in a village hall and the booking gets cancelled or the hall gets flooded. Clearly, if you're travelling to Africa, there could be travel risks involved. We need to know how you're going to make sure that people are safe and that they're protected and that you're reducing any risks through the delivery of your project. And we can't fund travel to countries or regions within countries where the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office advise against travel. There's a section there on budget. We've taken the budget out of the application form as it was last year and put it into a separate Excel spreadsheet. We think that that sheet is pretty manageable and pretty easy to work. Make sure that you select the correct sheet. That's done at a tab at the bottom. There's a different spreadsheet for the smaller projects of up to £1,000 and a slightly more complex spreadsheet then for the larger applications. Please write your budget over the example budget, which is in pale grey. So somebody did complain that we told them not to write over the budget in pale grey. Please do write over that budget. Don't leave that information in there. Don't try to change the totals. They should add up automatically. And what we'd really like to see in the budget is a simple but clear breakdown of what it is that you need to spend. So we don't need to see every single last absolute detail, but instead of, for example, writing airfares £1,200, we'd like to see really, airfares for 2 people going to this place at that figure. So give us a little bit more information than just a headline, but we don't need to see an elaborate amount of information in the budget sheet. And we will get back to you for clarification if we need to. We ask you to talk about match funding and in-kind funding for your project. it's very important that we see that our grant scheme is getting some more money and getting more resources from other people. So match funding could be cash contributions from other fundraising that you're doing, from donations that you're given, from organising your own fundraising activities or applying for other grants. So match funding essentially is cash which comes into the project through some other route. In-kind contributions, that's not cash. That's donations of goods, of services or time, which clearly has a value and can be included as part of the overall cost of your project, but which doesn't come in as cash. So if a volunteer is going to spend 5 days working on your project, then we would say that you could declare that as a gift of time in kind at around £150 a day. People, of course, with particularly some of our health projects, we find that people are putting in quite high values for their time, as clearly senior doctors tend to do, and we can consider that as well as part of an in-kind contribution. So please do tell us about any other contributions that you have coming in. So the deadline for applications is on the 4th of April 2016. We'd like to see applications received here by noon on the 4th of April. We'll be holding a grants panel around the 28th of April, and we will tell people after the 7th of May what it is that we have decided. You can see all of the information on our website. There's lots of information there about the criteria, the 3 different application forms, the other forms, and also on there is our frequently asked questions document, which includes more detailed information about some of the things that we've been talking about today, including a briefing on the Sustainable Development Goals and the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So you can see everything there. That's on www.hubcymruafrica.cymru. And that is the end of our presentation. We have already got a couple of questions coming through in the question box. So I would encourage everybody now to tap away and write some more questions in the questions box if you like, or you can raise your hand. If you can see a little hand signal, then you should be able to click on that to raise your hand. And we will, we've got a few hands raised, so we're going to try to unmute some of these people who've raised their hands and see if we can get them to come into the webinar and ask or say whatever they like. So should we start with Steve?
Yes, we shall. Just to reiterate, if you want to raise your hand to ask a verbal question, it's the yellow hand symbol that's on your toolbar, your control panel. So click on the yellow hand and it raises your hand. You can click it again to put your hand down, and that's how you do it. Right, Steve, we're going to unmute you now so that we can all hear Steve and to ask a question. Steve?
Hi, Jenny.
Hi.
Hi, Jenny. Hi, Julian. Good morning to you.
Hello.
Ask away.
Okay. Yes, it's on the matter of the match and in-kind funding, and our particular project will require engineering consultants and cost consultants input. And you mentioned higher rates. Would it be acceptable to put in rates which are commensurable with industry rates?
Yes, that's fine. Yeah, do it
okay,
to whatever is appropriate to the you know, the usual kind of contribution that would come at that usual industry rate if it's an industry related thing. Yeah, that's fine.
Super. Thank you. Can I ask another 2 questions, or are we just limited to 1 question? Okay, fine. The partnership agreements. We have a partnership agreement that existed back in the Wales Africa community link. And it's been important for us to maintain that continuity back to that partnership agreement. Would it be acceptable to include that agreement into this particular section?
Yeah, we'd like to see it, please. That's one of the sort of mandatory documents that if you do have a partnership, then we'd like to see the agreement. So yes, please send it.
Okay, fine. And the last question I have is in connection with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Would I be right in saying that reference and perhaps a justification would need to go into Section 5?
Yes, we'd either like it if it relates to how you've identified the need for your project, perhaps, then it could go into Section 5, or perhaps you might make reference to it also in the project summary in Section 6.
Thank you.
I would say it's also, you could also make some reference to it in the beneficiaries section, particularly in terms of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in Wales. Then we would expect, I suppose, any project to help to deliver that. And so there is a section there which just talks about indirect beneficiaries or other beneficiaries. So you could make reference to either of those things in that section as well.
And that's I think that's 6.5 according to the document I have in front of me.
Yes.
6.5 beneficiaries.
Depending on the form. So.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yes, I understand. Yeah, we are looking at 5 to 15. So yeah. Okay.
Is that okay?
And just going back on the reference to the well-being and the sustainable goals. Have you got a summary document on your web so we could readily identify what the Welsh Government are looking for in terms of evidence? Yeah.
Yeah, have a look at the frequently asked questions document on the website, which includes a summary of all those relevant, provisions of the summarises the what's relevant from the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Thank
you very much, and
thanks,
the webinar was useful. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Right, we're putting Steve back on mute for a moment so that we can take someone else. Teresa, has your hand gone down? Perhaps your question's been answered. We'll just come to written questions for a moment, and we have a couple of those. Bear with me 1 second. Right. First, Mark, you asked about airfares and elaborate on airfares being included. You might need to provide us some more question to that, but just anticipating what I think you might be getting at. Basically, you can include the airfare cost as part of your bid. That's okay. Last year we had a rule that attempted to limit that to 25% of the grant, but this year, if you feel you need to ask for 100% of the airfare in order to enable your project to happen, and that's somebody probably flying from Wales to Africa to go and help facilitate the project, then that's okay to include it. We will consider, are you trying to make any contribution yourselves? Are you doing any fundraising for that? If you can somehow, that's great. That would be great. That would count as a positive. But if you do want to ask for the total of it because you're fundraising for some other part of your project, or that's the only bit that you can't easily support, or you can ask for part of the grant even for the other part of your project, and it can all be encompassed, then that's fine. So I don't know if that answers your question, but do feel free to send a follow-up question. Okay, that's got you. Okay, good. Right, question from Kathy about the grants of over 5k, whether we can clarify whether they can be delivered solely in Wales and not also in Africa. For example, training an individual from Africa in Wales rather than sending people from Wales to deliver. The answer to that is yes, Kathy. Yes, we can. And the activity can take place solely in Wales if it is a grant of up to 5k. Looking at that. Actually, no, I've just realised I'm not correctly understanding your question. Looking at my colleague here, looking at Judy, while we think about the 5 to 15 and whether the activity is taking place in Wales but relates to the African implementation.
That's a very interesting question, Kathy. I think that that generally your activity in terms of training somebody from Africa but doing that in Wales is fine. I think one area that I would be cautious about would be that you would also need to demonstrate impact in Africa. Now, if you're training somebody in Wales and they are returning to Africa and they are doing things, then I think you could probably argue quite clearly that they would have an impact. I think that what we would be looking to see, what the panel would be looking to see, would be how you would measure that impact. And so I think it's an interesting case where potentially you could be delivering the project in Wales, but you would have to show us how you would be able to monitor the impact of that in Africa. Okay, so is that a clarification there, Kathy, that it should read in relation to the grant for £1,000 to £5,000, then yes, actually, that's fine. You don't have to demonstrate impact in Africa for a grant of up to £5,000. But again, we would be looking to see what your project was, what the impacts of it were.